Duke fans, welcome to episode 499 of the DBR Podcast. This is the episode, to some extent, we've been waiting for all year, because this is the episode where the NCAA bracket has been revealed, and we're going to talk about our thoughts about Duke's seed and who we're playing and who we're matched up against, how the ACC did, which teams got overseeded, which teams got underseeded, who got snubbed, and who got lucky. We're going to bring it all to you. I am Jason Evans. I will be your host on your journey today. Joining me, as always, Sam Klein and Donald Wine. Sam, there's something new about your setup, I believe?
Yeah, I'm in a hotel room, which, is fun, I guess. I'm on a work trip this week, so I'm out of town today. I'll be back Thursday morning in time for the regular games to start. So I'll have a decent setup, at least for the first weekend of the tournament.
Yeah, I believe we don't yet know the time that Duke is playing on Thursday.
That's right.
That has not been announced yet. It's fairly likely, folks, by the time you are listening to this podcast, that you will know what time Duke will be playing on Thursday. But just full disclosure, we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other man in the room here with us is Donald Wine. Donald, still out in Vegas, baby?
Yeah, so Sam is in a hotel room. That makes two of us. I'm in my hotel room here at Planet Hollywood. Yeah, this is the best time of the year. So I'm ready to get going. Let's talk about where Duke is going. And it seems like Duke is going south, then east.
Yeah, exactly. So the Blue Devils end up as the number 5 seed in the East region. They will have a first round match with Oral Roberts. And this is one of the things about being a 5 is that you get those 5-12 matchups, and those 5-12 matchups are always scary. A lot of people think the 4 and the 5 aren't that different. I do not like the 5-12 matchups, and Oral Roberts is going to be a test. Gentlemen, let's initially do this. Let's discuss Duke's 5 seed. And I'll start by saying I think we are robbed. I think it's ridiculous. Duke should absolutely be a 4. I don't know how the NCAA selection committee put Virginia as a 4 and made Duke a 5. If you paid attention to the news, you knew that Duke beat Virginia twice, even though officially they split. But their most recent outing on a neutral floor, Duke was clearly the better team. There's little question which team is playing better down the stretch. If you look at the full body of work, I think Duke's body of work is better than Virginia's. Most of the advanced metrics say that Duke is better than Virginia. I don't get it, but Duke's a 5. Sam, what's your feeling on that?
I can't imagine that. We know that the selection committee doesn't consider the recency of your achievements. It is a full look at the resume. So which,
by the way, is a little bit absurd. The notion that a game in November counts as much as a game in March doesn't make much sense to me if you're trying to pick the best teams and put together the best bracket. But continue.
Anyway, that's what it is. But to your second, and so I agree that Duke has been better as of late, especially given that they beat Virginia just 2 days ago or 1 day ago. But also looking at their resume, I wonder the same thing, especially because Virginia's got a quad 3 loss and Duke does not. And when you look at predictive metrics, when you look at the net rankings, Duke scores out much better than Virginia does, sort of across the board. So I'm not sure how this happened. That being said, the thing that I was more looking for, like I see that Duke gets Oral Roberts, and that Oral Roberts is probably better than your average 12 seed in terms of their predictive metrics this season. But I look at the fact that Duke and Virginia are playing in the same first round city. So if they swap places, it's not like things would have been any easier for like that much easier for Duke in terms of logistics. I also strongly prefer the possibility that if Duke gets through Oral Roberts and through a Tennessee team that is down a key player, that they get to go to New York City. And when I was looking ahead, I told you last night, there is a chance that Duke beating Virginia last night means that Duke gets Greensboro and New York as its path. And if you're the 5 seed, you're not getting any sort of preferential treatment for anything, right? You're not getting preference on your first round or your Sweet 16 location. I'd say Orlando, New York. If John Shire likes the idea of being relatively close to home and having fans in the building, this is about as good of an outcome. The only thing better, I think, would have been Greensboro. And I guess because Kansas State took Greensboro away as a 3 seed, that it wasn't even available to Duke as a 4. So I agree with you, Jason, that I think Duke should have been a 4 over a 5. I don't think the impact of it is going to be that enormous when it comes to all of the sort of ancillary considerations for where Duke is placed in the field.
I agree with the two of you. I think Duke being a 5, I felt like entering today, I was like, we're pretty much going to be a 5. We should probably be a 4. And we definitely should be a 4 over Virginia, who, again, we just beat yesterday and we held to under 50 points. And I think the path that we have is probably the reward, I guess, or the consolation prize of being the 5. Like you said, Sam, we get to go to Orlando. It's not Greensboro, but it was one of the closest places we go. Keep in mind that Kentucky is in Greensboro, so we get to avoid, some, hostile fan bases by going to Orlando. Virginia is not really a hostile fan base, neither is Tennessee. But then after that, getting to New York, that would be obviously the goal. We play well in New York. That'll be a home game of sorts away from home for Duke fans by being in the Garden. We've played in the Garden so far once this year. We played Iowa up there. So I think in that regard, I think it's a consolation prize of sorts, but I agree. I think the 4 was there for us, and it feels like the way that the bracket shaped out, that it feels like that Virginia was a solid 4 and we were a solid 5, and yesterday's decision or yesterday's result didn't really change things between those two teams.
One other interesting thing that I was looking at between Duke's path and Virginia's path is that Duke gets the opportunity, again, assuming that Duke makes it to the second weekend, which is certainly not a guarantee, but assuming that they do make it, they get to play presumably Purdue in that Sweet 16 game.
Revenge.
And I love the idea of this version of Duke, the version that we've seen for the last 4 or 5 weeks, getting a rematch against Purdue. And on the other side, I very much hope, for the sake of watching basketball, that Virginia gets to play Alabama, because what a hilarious contrast of styles it's going to be. Like, Alabama just runs and runs and runs and shoots a ton of threes. So that game will be very interesting. And there's a part of me that's like, I don't want any part of the Alabama story this season. I don't want to dredge up any of the stuff of Nate Oates, like talking about Duke in years past, talking about Coach K. I don't want to have to talk about the stuff that's been going on at Alabama this year. So if Virginia or San Diego State or whoever, you know what, even Maryland, I will root for Maryland to beat Alabama, because I don't want them in this tournament. I don't like talking about them. And so just get them away from our from our storyline.
Yeah, I agree. And at the same time, it's funny. I was talking today with some of my friends about Alabama, and I was like, look, this team, it feels like this is going to be the storyline. And the fact that the number 1 overall seed means we have to hear about it. And if you were watching the game today, they played the SEC tournament final today. They literally every break would come back and say, Brandon Miller has 5 points. Also, Brandon Miller did all this stuff this year, or at least was a part of this particular incident this year. And it's going to be a storyline throughout the entire tournament. We get to stay far away from that. Again, I think our pod's set up great. We get to avoid a lot of the hostile fan bases, which has always been a problem. And honestly, there's sometimes a little bit of pressure for Duke playing at Greensboro, right? Because we've had some games there that have been shaky. We've lost in Greensboro in the tournament before. And the fact that we just got done playing in Greensboro, we kind of get to get that out of our minds and look forward to a new site, a new logistics, a new home away from home. And I think Orlando can be that for us.
So just to sort of close the book on this notion of Duke as a 5 or a 4, you both agree with me that we're underseeded as a 5, but I think another way to look at it, and this is the way I'm choosing to look at it with the rose-colored glasses, Duke blue-colored glasses, so to speak, is let's say Duke and Virginia flip-flopped, because that's a pretty reasonable thing. In fact, I sort of would have guessed that the committee would have said, hey, here's a 4 in the in the South or whatever is the mid, it's the South, yeah, and here's the 5 in the East, and the winner of the ACC will go here and the loser will go there between Duke and Virginia. That's clearly not what they did. But the way you can look at it is this way. So Duke gets Oral Roberts in the first round, and Virginia gets Furman. And there's no question Oral Roberts is better than Furman. But in both cases, those are games that you should win. In the next round, as we mentioned, Duke's going to get Tennessee, a Tennessee team that is not the team it was a few weeks ago. A Tennessee team that has been playing much poorer, and where their point guard, their leading scorer, their best player has been out for a few weeks, and they haven't figured out what to do without him yet. So, on the other hand, Virginia is probably going to get San Diego State. And San Diego State is a really good team.
They've been tough all year.
Yeah, like the predictive metrics, Ken Pomeroy and the such, will tell you that San Diego State should have been a 4 seed, maybe even a 3. So that's a tough one. And then assuming you make it past all that, Duke is in a region with Purdue. We've already talked about the fact Purdue, by the way, is not playing as well as they were earlier in the year. We know that team already. And I am excited for Derek Lively to get a chance to go against Zach Edey. On the other hand, as you said, Virginia's in Alabama's bracket. And like Sam said, it's not just I want no part of the Alabama story. I think Alabama's a really, really good team.
The other, a couple other notes about UVA's draw. They do get the benefit of playing San Diego State in Orlando, which will, favor Virginia.
That's about as far as.
Yeah, it's not ideal travel for San Diego State, but if UVA makes it through, their trip to Louisville is not that bad. But I can tell you that Louisville will be crawling with Alabama fans, assuming that they are there. If Duke is playing in the Garden, Duke has the most fans like maybe if like UConn had gotten to the East region, but they're not. Nobody else that sort of tells me if Villanova's not here. UConn's not here. Syracuse isn't here. Like these other sort of Northeast teams that have big followings, they're not going to New York. So I feel like Duke is more nervous about the ways in which it can trip up in the first weekend, and then the second weekend it's like if they get there, they've got to feel like they've got sort of the home court advantage. And by the way, if you asked me 6 weeks ago how good of a draw I think Duke is going to get, this is pretty awesome. So maybe Duke feels slighted a little bit. I think in the grand scheme, I feel pretty good about the fact that despite all the challenges this season, Duke's path still goes through the East Regional.
Well, and I had a good friend, my friend Jonathan, I've mentioned him before, who said prior to the bracket being revealed, he was like, he goes, the teams I want, Purdue, Purdue, Purdue. And I said, the teams I want, Tennessee, Tennessee, Tennessee. And Duke gets both of those. So assuming we get past Max Abmas at Oral Roberts, who is a hell of a player, I really like where Duke stands. Donald, really quick, what about the rest of the ACC? We've obviously talked about Virginia, but tell me about the rest of the ACC and what they're looking like.
Yeah, so let's recap all. There's 5 teams that made the NCAA tournament from the ACC. You mentioned UVA. They're the 4th seed in the South. They will play 13 seed Furman. And Miami, 5 seed in the Midwest, so they get to go to Kansas City if they eventually make it to the Sweet 16. They will take on 12 seed Drake. Obviously we have Duke. NC State. A lot of people talk about NC State being one of the last 4 teams in this tournament. They solidly make the tournament. They are 11th seed in the South. They will take on 6 seed Creighton. And I'm sorry for people who are Creighton fans out there, I don't like that matchup for you. NC State, if Jarkel Joyner and Terquavion Smith are on fire, then that could be an 11-6 upset for some of you people filling out those brackets. And finally, Pitt, the 11th seed in the Midwest, they will be one of the last 4 teams in. They are in the first 4. They will take on 11th seed Mississippi State. I believe I don't think they've set whether that's Tuesday or Wednesday, but Pitt, they were on the bubble and they got in barely. They were one of the last 4 teams in. I will say this for those playing Schadenfreude today, UNC, one of the first 4 teams out, that was the only other ACC team made. They announced that they will not accept a bid to the NIT. So their season is over.
It's interesting that Carolina decided not to do that. I guess there was a lot of comments from UNC after their exit from the ACC tournament that they feel really beat down from this season. I feel like there's a part of me, I don't know. Duke hasn't been in this exact position. Obviously, Duke missed the tournament a couple years ago, so it's not like we don't know the feeling of having a team that underperforms. But
look,
part of me feels like
had there been an NIT that year, Duke would have been invited. I'm certain of that.
But we don't know if Duke was going to accept that, and Coach K didn't even have to address the issue. So,
but we also had the COVID outbreak that knocked us out of the ACC tournament. Then we didn't make the NCAA, and it was probably because of the fact that we had that outbreak and it wasn't quite cleared yet.
So interesting that Carolina chooses not to go to the NIT. Part of me feels like there's a little bit of like humble pie you can serve the players by accepting that bid, the way that Kentucky has done a couple times. And so I'm interested in that, although I don't think we have to linger on it. One other point on the ACC's draw, Jason, before I give it back to you. NC State, you mentioned Donald gets Creighton in the first round, which might be an advantage stylistically for NC State, but is not geographically. Creighton is coming from Omaha, NC State's coming from Raleigh, and they're playing in Denver, where they're playing at altitude. So I am sure you're going to hear, if you're paying attention to Kevin Keats this week, you're going to hear him talking about that and the challenges it presents. There's always wacky outcomes when they play these games in Denver and Salt Lake City, Albuquerque. Any of those cities that are at altitude can present weird challenges for teams who aren't used to it. So that's going to. I'm nervous for NC State. Not that I care that much about them, but I'm nervous for them playing Creighton out west.
Well, and I'll say this for NC State, it's tough for them to have Creighton because Creighton is one of those teams. You may recall from the preseason, Creighton was ranked in a lot of people's top 10s. They're sort of just like Duke. They're a team that was seen as, top 10, top 15 kind of club. And their season was largely disappointing. And then they sort of came on a little bit late in the year. I feel like they are a team that they're a very veteran team, very experienced with a very, very experienced coach. I feel like they're one of these teams that if you're going to look for a somewhat lower seed to pick to make a little bit of a run, Creighton is a really good pick for that. And so that makes it really tough for NC State. Obviously, I think this is a very, very talented Creighton team. And then back to UNC really quick, Sam. I mentioned this on the Duke Basketball Reports forums. I think Carolina should have accepted the bid to the NIT, and then they should have ran out a lineup that featured Dontrez Styles and Seth Trimble and DeMarco Dunn. I'm not saying this as a penalty to Caleb Love and the rest of, Armando Bacot and such, Pete Nance, not to penalize those guys, but to literally treat the NIT as, hey, let's have a look at what these guys would be like next year, because Hubert didn't
like a spring game in football.
Hubert didn't play these guys that much during the season. And, I think it'd be very interesting for UNC, keep RJ Davis because he's going to be back next year. But maybe look at what these other guys can do. If you really give them some time, a few days of practice, I think it could have been interesting for Carolina. I guess the downside would have been if they played well, people would be like, why the heck weren't they playing?
Hubert Davis is just done with this team. I'd mentioned how he looked in the press conference after the game last weekend against Duke, and the fact that he just looked defeated, like the whole team kind of looked defeated. This feels like this whole team was like, yo, let's just put a wrap on this season and go our separate ways.
So let's talk a little bit more really quick about the East bracket. Donald, I know you want to talk about this. I'm looking at it and I'm like, there are a lot of teams that are really, Duke's lucky we got Tennessee because the rest of the draw, Memphis just upset Houston. Marquette is a 2 that some people said could have been a 1. You've got a Kentucky club that sort of like Duke, high expectations, fell a little bit and then came on strong. This is a really, really tough bracket, isn't it?
It is. And I think the interesting part about it is that the reason why a lot of people are saying that this bracket kind of opens up for Duke is because all these teams play each other, right? Like you mentioned Memphis, they just beat the pants off of Houston. Houston that was without Marcus Strasser, but still just, beat them in the final. They're there. FAU, a really good team. They're 13th in the net, 26th in KenPom. It feels like a lot of these teams that are really high in these rankings, the KenPom and the net, it felt like that was kind of overlooked in some of these seedings. Tennessee, you mentioned they're without one of their best players, but there are 4 in the net and the 5 in KenPom, and they're a 4 seed. So basically KenPom saying that this should have been maybe a 2 seed. Marquette, 12 in the net, 12 in KenPom. Michigan State, always a strong team. USC kind of came on a little bit strong late. Kansas State has a couple really good players. Kentucky and Providence play each other, and I feel like you can't really predict what's going to happen there, because both teams kind of underachieved but came on strong late, and they're both kind of, it feels like they're reaching their peak at this point, but they have to play each other. So I think the long story short is, with some of these teams, they could pose some problems for Duke, but we don't have to face them all. And I think people, when they're filling out this bracket, they're going to realize that, hey, if Memphis or FAU is supposed to be a team that's really dangerous, we only have to face one of them. And then they may not even make it because you have Purdue looming in the second round. So it's one of those things where if Duke plays their game, they can probably get pretty far. And these chips can fall where they may only have to experience a couple of these roadblocks along the way. But make no mistake, the East is a very difficult region to predict because of all of these teams that have been playing well as of late. They are all meeting each other in this tournament, and it's going to be an interesting way to kind of see how this bracket falls apart.
So guys, we're going to have much more, mostly on Oral Roberts, but on the bracket and on the draw. We're going to have our final 4 picks, all that other kind of stuff coming up in a couple days. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, we got to reflect a little bit more on the ACC tournament and the performance of the Blue Devils winning the ACC tournament. We'll have that. Stick around. All right, we're back from the break, and I just wanted to really quickly, I know Donald and Sam aren't necessarily prepared for this, but I want to talk about the ACC tournament a little bit more. A great victory by the Blue Devils. I found a couple amazing statistics. Duke men's basketball tweeted this out. Duke's largest deficit in the ACC tournament was 2 points. The total amount of time the Duke was trailing in the entire ACC tournament was 4 minutes and 32 seconds. I'd say we dominated the tournament.
Duke Invitational.
It was.
As stressful as all 3 of the games, or as the Miami and the Virginia game were. The
Pitt game was not stressful.
Was not stressful, but as stressful as the Miami and the Virginia games were, looking back on them, maybe now I'm getting myself more fired up about the fact that Duke isn't a 4 seed after the performance they put on over the last 2 days. But yeah, pretty incredible. And then today, I mentioned last night that John Shire felt like he seemed like he was a bit, I don't know if it's shell shocked because that implies that it was negative, but still just like in a state of like, what's happening to me right after the game. He was on ESPN this evening right before we started recording, and was similarly just like full coach speak, but clearly enjoying it. He seemed to be recording from his house, so I guess they didn't have a party, or at least if they did, he went home immediately after watching the selection show with the team, because it seemed like he was at home. But yeah, pretty amazing.
So the other thing I wanted to mention about the ACC tournament was they've announced the all tournament teams, first team and second team all tournament teams. I'll just lay it out for you very quickly. Kyle Filipowski, of course, on the first team. Jeremy Roach also made the first team, along with Isaiah Wong of Miami, Jaden Gardner of Virginia, and Terquavion Smith of NC State. I'll just say right away that a team that didn't make the semis in NC State probably doesn't deserve to have a player on the first team. Terquavion Smith had one great game where he scored 30 points. His other game, he wasn't that great. I don't know how he got first team, but okay, whatever. The second team, Jordan Miller of Miami, Armand Franklin of Virginia, a guy who, by the way, we did not talk enough about what a job Mark Mitchell did on Armand Franklin. That dude was
here.
He was unbelievable in Virginia's first couple games, and then did next to nothing against Mark Mitchell in the Duke defense. Also on the second team, Reese Beekman, RJ Davis of North Carolina, and Derek Lively of Duke. So here's what I wanted to mention. Derek Lively makes the second team all-tournament team for the ACC tournament. He averaged 8.3 points per game, 4.7 rebounds per game, 2.3 blocks per game is good, but like you look at those stats and you're like, what is this guy doing on the all-tournament team? I mean, Tyrese Proctor averaged 10.5 points per game and 6 assists per game. Hunter Tyson and PJ Hall both had really nice games for Clemson. Clemson doesn't get a single guy on the first or second team, even though they made the semis. What's going on here? It's because Derek Lively's defense was so apparent. It goes beyond statistics. There's no question he's on the second team. In fact, I would argue you could almost take Terquavion Smith off the first team, put Derek Lively on the first team, and no one would bat an eye, because that's what a difference his defense was.
It's great you bring this up, Jason, for 2 reasons. One, they asked John Shire about this today during the selection show, and he was like, Derek Lively and I have had a lot of one-on-one time to make him better this season and to readjust his attitude from, being from being like the top prospect last year to now accepting what's basically like a role player type job. Like he's in the starting lineup, but he's not the focal point of the offense. But he's playing this astounding role on defense. So that was the first thing. The second is when you reflect back on these games, I feel like the whole commentary throughout all the games when Duke was on defense was, okay, just pay attention to where Derek Lively is. They won't take shots from there. Like if he's on the perimeter, they're not taking shots. Like they're trying to draw him out so they don't have to get their shot blocked. But he is moving in a way and has so much length that makes it very hard for most college players to adjust to what he's doing. Like Virginia's guards, who are very shifty, were getting into the lane and then being like, oh, no, I can't do my regular thing here. I'd like to see all the clips in practice of Jeremy Roach trying all of his going to the basket trickery against Derek Lively. I feel like there have been some good matchups there.
I think just for me, I'm glad that something has come about where at least the ACC is recognizing those things that stats can't cover, right? Like we've talked about all year, the number of times that we would give a half block to Derek Lively for some of the shots that he altered or some of the shots that he clearly like made sure was not going to go in. Like those things can't be counted and they're not quantified. And so the fact that they are basically honored him for the unquantifiable, if you will, I think is great. So congratulations to him. He had a great tournament. I liked that Duke men's basketball Twitter. They're like, yo, we had Proctor and Mark Mitchell on our team too. Because I think everyone contributed. And I think all those guys would be the first to say like, yes, Flip was the man, Flip was the MVP, but it was a total team effort to get this team over the hump and win the ACC tournament.
I've got the ESPN selection show still on.
Same.
Alfonso Ellis just picked Duke to lose to Alabama in the Final Four.
All of them have Duke in the Final Four. Jay Billis actually has us losing in the title game to UConn. So everyone else has.
I looked down. I looked down during that. So
yeah.
It almost makes me nervous that everyone believes in Duke right now.
Can I just say, like 2 weeks ago, this would have been laughable, right? I'm not crazy.
I still kind of laugh at it, but you're right. It's one of those like, wait, that's plausible.
The idea that every pundit is picking Duke to make the Final Four 2 weeks ago would have seemed like a joke. You would have been like, no way. They're looking at a 7 or an 8 seed. And there'll be a trendy pick to get knocked out by the 10, the 9 or the 10 that they're playing.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are. Everyone's like, they should have been a 4. They're playing like a 2, and I'm picking them to make the Final Four. It's
also shout out. I know this is going to not be on our show, but the women's selection show bracket show is about to start. So hopefully Kara Lawson and the ladies get a good spot there. I'll be looking forward to watching where they end up.
All right, with that, we're going to wrap it up here. Just so everybody knows, if your podcast feed, if you feel like, gosh, there's a lot of Duke basketball content hitting my feed today, that is because we're going to be very busy over the next few days. As we've mentioned, episode 500 coming tomorrow will be our interview with Kenny Denard, the dog. He is always an interesting, funny, great interview. We're really looking forward to that. I'll go ahead and spoil it. Guys, can I say who we're going to interview on Tuesday?
Of course.
If you want to do it and risk the jinx that something goes wrong and we don't get it, fine, but go ahead.
Who are we supposed to interview on Tuesday?
On Tuesday, we're supposed to interview Carlos Boozer of the ACC Network, father of a pair of very impressive high school recruits and a former Blue Devil. We will be talking to Carlos. He's, by the way, going to talk a little bit about a NCAA tournament picking contest that he's involved with. And then on Wednesday, we'll be back in your feed again to discuss our preview of Oral Roberts and what Duke will be facing as we begin to embark on the NCAA tournament. So all that is coming at you in the next few days. Be ready for a lot of DBR content. I'm Jason. He's Sam. He's Donald. Thanks so much for tuning in. Do not forget to write to us, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. We love those emails. Now is the time to like and subscribe. If you have not liked and subscribed, what are you doing? Why are you still listening to me? You should be clicking the buttons right now so that you like and subscribe to the DBR podcast. All right. Again, for Donald and Sam, I'm Jason. Thanks for joining us. Here's the Duke Band to play us out and take us home. So I'm so screwed. So I thought that my wife and I were going to get some pokey for dinner tonight. Instead, at the last minute, we sort of went, oh, you know what we haven't done in a while? We haven't done sushi at home. Like I make really good sushi rice. We do sushi at home. There's this farmer's market near us that has just incredible, fabulous sushi grade. It's all, it's perfect fish.
Mm-hmm.
Every time we do it, I think, I can get this prepped. I can get this done. I can make the rice and cut the fish and everything in like a half hour. I'm always wrong. Always. It's like, I should just know. Like I thought, oh, we're recording this at 7:30. I'll have plenty of time to get dinner. Literally, my plate of dumplings and sushi is getting, well, the sushi's not getting cold. The dumplings are getting cold next to me. I've had like 2 dumplings. It's just, it's all my fault. It's all my fault. And my poor wife is sitting here. She can't talk to me during dinner. She is eating her sushi in silence so that we can do this podcast.
Wow.
Well, first of all, hi.
Hey, Kathy.
Hi.
So let's get started so you can get back to your dumplings, because I have dumplings too.
Yeah.
I told you I'm trying to get out of here quickly, so let's do it.